Yes, and I think that's a very important point you raised there, because that is, I think, a focal point of our demos, is that we say, look, if a conversation isn't worth your time, there are always people standing around the cube who are willing to listen. Because you get two types of bystanders who come to these Cube of Truth demos. You get people who want to talk and people who are just there to argue. And the people who are there to argue, they're not going to listen to anything you say. They'll just excuse after excuse after excuse. And it is all well and good knowing your stuff, absolutely, which is why I'm running this sort of workshop today, to equip people with the knowledge that they need. But sometimes people just aren't willing to listen, and that's why I do think it is important that we say, look, if you're in a conversation where someone's just there to argue and not to listen, that you move on to the next person, and you can just close the conversation and say, look, it's been nice talking to you today, but I have other work to do. Yeah, well, unfortunately, I do think it's actually going to get to a stage where it's not so much where things are just gradually decreasing and getting better and people are saying, oh, this is great. I actually think what's going to happen is we're going to go towards a disaster, and only then will people actually go, damn, you know, we'd better actually do something about this. It could be soon. An acre of rainforest is cut down every single second worldwide. So if you think of how much rainforest there is and how much is being cut down, it could be very soon that the UN or whoever just says, do you know what, guys, maybe it's time that we stop farming animals. But corporate interests are just, you know, as you all know, just play such a huge part in environmental policies and everything like that. So it could be tough, and it might be too late one day. And that's why I think it's important that we speak up whenever we can about you know, the environmental stuff that's happening worldwide at all. And I also say to people, you know, because they say there are other issues going on and stuff when you mention veganism, and you can just say to those people, well, look, without veganism, those issues that you care about wouldn't even have a planet to exist on. You need veganism if you even want these other issues to be solved. So that's what I'd say to that. That's a quite tough one to tackle, but what I usually say to that is not a single person who's ever asked me that question has been an Inuit or someone from a third world country. Every single person who's raised that point is someone living in the civilized West, the developed West, where they have access to everything. It's, I guess, what you call a red herring fallacy. They're actually trying to take the argument somewhere else. There's a fallacy section on my website, by the way, guys, which will show you all the different fallacies that are used against vegans, so check out that section if you can. So that's, I guess, a red herring fallacy. They're trying to divert the argument somewhere else in order to make it easier to argue, because the simple fact is that person who's saying that can go vegan. They don't live in the North Pole. You know, and if it's an argument on Facebook, I always say to them, damn, if you live in the North Pole, that's some pretty good Wi-Fi signal that you've got there to be saying that to me. And, you know, they always make these arguments and they're living just down the road from you, and it's just pointless. They're trying to steer the conversation away so as to make their own complicity in what's happening to animals, you know, guilt them less, essentially. So try not to entertain that argument too much is what I say to people. Try not to actually get drawn into arguing the semantics of, oh, well, this would happen in the North Pole, because these are essentially, to us people, everyone here in the room, it's a hypothetical scenario. It's not really something too much worth discussing. Good point. Yes, cheese does have opiates in it. I don't know how many of you know that, but it does have opiate properties. Our mother's milk does. It's meant to make us form a bond with our own mother, so it's the same as any animal species. The reason I tend not to go down that track though, is because sometimes, I mean, that could work for some people, but for some people you also get the people, if they entertain that argument too much, they might think they're almost the victim, in the sense where they're like an addict and they're like, but you know, they start treating themselves like a heroin addict who needs rehab or something like that. And it's like, you don't get cheese withdrawal symptoms. You know, if you haven't eaten cheese, even the strongest cheese addict, they don't start clawing at the walls at night and crying and sweating because they haven't eaten cheddar or something that night, like a heroin addict would. Their body actually says, you have to give me some heroin, like, you know, they'll start shivering and sweating if they don't have it. That's why we have to put them on dopamine. But is it dopamine? I've probably got that wrong. But with cheese, you know, despite its opiate qualities, I don't think it does have the effect of like hard drugs. And so that's why I think it's also important that we just fall back on the ethics for those questions. You say, look, this is a really useful arguing tactic as well, actually. if you find common ground with the person who's arguing with you, it tends to make them more agreeable to what you're about to say. So you say, yeah, oh, you know, that was my favourite cheese back in the day. I always say Borsan, that was my favourite cheese. Borsan, that was my favourite cheese back in the day. But I acknowledged that my taste buds were not more important than someone else's life or someone else's motherhood. And that's why I gave up dairy. And now I can make all these delicious cheese replacements myself. You can make them at home, or you can I know not in your opinion, but you can buy them in store. This is why I think it's important to always fall back on the ethics in those cases. There is one interesting route we can go down in such circumstances actually, and that's that you can actually say to those people, well look, veganism isn't so much about compassion, it's just a moral obligation, it's about justice. You might say to someone, you know, I don't care so much about this person who's just passed me down the street. That wouldn't give me the right to hurl racist or homophobic or sexist abuse at that person, just because you don't care about that person. And that's all veganism is, I guess. You don't even actually have to care about animals too much. I know vegans who say, I don't find animals that cute, I didn't really feel much when I watched slaughterhouse footage, but I just know that it's not okay to violate someone else's body without their consent. And that's what it is whenever we buy an animal product. We violate someone else's body who does not agree to being exploited or being eaten. So no matter how little compassion you have for that victim, it still doesn't justify it. And then if they don't like that argument, then yeah, it's just hopeless really. Yeah, so I was a meat eater for 23 years. There was no transition period for me. I ate meat, cheese, milk and eggs every single day. I used to go fishing, I used to go pigeon shooting with my dad. So if anyone can do this, you know, if I can do this, pretty much anyone can. Well, I say that, some people, as we just discussed, don't care. But anyone with a basic ounce of compassion in them can do it if I can do it. And I was online one day, and you know, I never looked into veganism or anything like that. And if anyone knows the grime artist JME, who I listen to, I'm a fan of his on Facebook, and he shared Gary Yourofsky's speech, which I assume many of you have seen, and he just said, watch the whole thing. And I watched it. It was horrible for me to watch, because obviously he was debunking all this stuff that, you know, I thought I knew about and clearly didn't. He blew the lid off everything that I'd previously you know, been in the dark about. It's a great speech. If anyone has not watched it, check it out on YouTube. Best speech you'll ever hear, and it honestly is the best speech you'll ever hear. If it could change my life, then it can change pretty much anyone's. And after I watched that speech, I just thought, you know what, I have to do something about this. I'm just a massive hypocrite for, you know, caring about dogs and cats and things like that, but, you know, committing these horrific acts of violence towards animals with my wallet. And I rang up my best mate, Big D, and I said, mate, you've got to watch this speech. It's called Best Speech You'll Ever Hear on YouTube. It's about veganism. He said, bollocks, mate, don't tell me that crap down the phone. I said, no, just give it a watch. He was like, no, mate. I was like, mate, just watch it and tell me what you thought. He was like, okay. He begrudgingly watched it, and then he rang me up afterwards and he goes, mate, oh my God, we have to change. And he went vegan as well, so now Big D to this day is still vegan. So I went vegan at the same time as him, and yeah, he's my longest friend. So he's still vegan with me right now, which is amazing. And from there on, I got obviously looking into activism, because obviously it's one thing to be vegan, but in a world where 99.9% of people are harming animals on a daily basis, it is very important that we get up and we actually speak up, we get on the streets. So I became friends on Facebook with Paul Bashir, who's obviously the co-founder of Anonymous for the Voiceless, with his girlfriend Asal. And I was talking to him one day on Facebook, and he'd seen all my Facebook posts and stuff as my friend on Facebook, and he liked my style a lot, so he just said, look mate, I think you'd do a really good job if you brought Anonymous to the Voiceless to the UK, set up the London chapter. And I was really, really nervous about doing it, but I thank God that I did, and I'm really pleased at how well it's taken off in the country. So yeah, it's been a great journey, and as I say, if I, a person who is doing all these things to harm animals, can now become a vegan activist who's now you know, doing talks in places and stuff like that, then I think that's an inspiring message for anyone to take, for any I say for any family and friends, I was about to say, but family and friends can often be the toughest people to convert to veganism. So as I say, look for those people who are thirsting for knowledge. Does anyone have any particularly tough family or friends? I expect most people do, right?
We're all right.
Yeah, that's good. But yeah, I think for a lot of people, you get a lot of the younger generation and stuff like that who their parents don't take it well and such, and that's why I think it's important that we put our hands on their shoulders, so to speak, and help them through that. Well, that's actually a fallacy called a fallacy of relative privation, which means an appeal to other problems. You could do that with any argument they made. What I like to say to those people is, do you go up to human rights activists and say, what are you doing about hamsters? Well, if not, why do you go up to animal rights activists and say, what are you doing about humans? And those people who say that, not a single one of those people who have ever made that argument were actually doing anything about those arguments that they mentioned. Again, it's just another diversion tactic. If you get someone who comes up to you and says, there's people dying in Syria, you can just say, well, join the army then, mate. Go and fight ISIS. Send me pictures to prove that you actually care about this issue. Because none of them do. It's just like essentially a form of virtue signalling. They're essentially just pretending to care about an issue. Again, just to divert away from the actual message. But one thing is that veganism is something that is actually within our power to, we can prevent animals from being harmed. People are dying in Syria. Okay, great. What are you going to actually do about it? With veganism, you can actually be part of a very simple justice movement, a very simple thing to do. You don't have to put your life on the line or anything like that fighting ISIS. It's just simply 3 meals a day, and every time you walk into a clothing store, you just say, I will not buy this. It's just a basic inaction. And it takes no more time to be vegan than it does to be non-vegan. So it can't be anything to do with, time constraints or anything like that. And if those people truly do care about those issues that they're claiming to care about, you can just say to them, look, being vegan won't deter you from actually doing anything about those issues. And those other issues you mentioned don't stop you from going vegan either. When people say, there's homeless people dying on the streets, well, you could just say, so when you go into a shop and you see the steak and the chickpeas, what, is a homeless person walking in and swatting the tin of chickpeas out your hand and saying you have to buy the steak? Of course not. It has nothing to do with it. So again, it's just another pointless diversion tactic. That's a tough one, and the reason it's tough is because obviously, as you say, you can't actually go around showing them every single slaughterhouse. But this is where it's important to fall back on the use of animals argument as opposed to treatment. I think vegans can often lose arguments if we focus too much on treatment, because if we say, damn, I can't prove it to you that all pigs are treated like this, that leaves them going away thinking that there is a humane way to do something, there is a right way to do the wrong thing, and there's not. So we say, look, there's no nice way of doing this at all. You can sing these pigs lullabies if you want and give them belly rubs every single day. But the moment you actually breed them for your own profit and then you stick a knife in their throat once they're no longer, once it's their time, you completely, violate your principles of humaneness. And that's again where we can use the victim replacement argument. So you can say to them, what would be your ideal farm with ideal conditions? And they'll tell you what it would be. And then you can just say to them, so then replace the pigs in that farm you've just given me with Labrador puppies. Would that be okay? And they'll say, no, but that's different. No, they're not bred for that. And you say, no, in this scenario that I'm just giving you, they are bred for that. You're literally breeding Labrador puppies to be humanely raised. Don't worry, they get a bolt gun in their head. They don't feel anything before their throats are slit. Is that okay? And that's, I think, a very effective argument, because if we focus too much on treatment, as I say, it just gives them the message that there is a right way to do the wrong thing when there's not. So we should focus on animal use as a vegan argument as opposed to treatment. China study, most comprehensive nutritional study in human history. It's a very good thing to mention to people when at Cube of Truths and stuff, when a bystander is telling you, how can you prove that it's just as healthy or it's healthier to live as a vegan? All the research shows us this. Mention to them the China study and say, look, this is the most comprehensive nutritional study in human history, and it concluded that a plant-based diet free of animal products, a whole foods plant-based diet, I should specify, is the optimum diet for human health. They'll often come back with an argument like, well, there must be a vegan agenda to it or something like that. Well, there's not. This was conducted by Oxford and Cornell universities, and the people who conducted the studies aren't even vegans. And a lot of vegans actually mistakenly say that Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn and Dr. Forget the guy whose name who wrote the China study. Colin Campbell. Yeah, that a lot of vegans actually mistakenly think that those guys are vegans, but they're not. They're plant-based. They eat a plant-based diet. They still wear leather, and I even heard that Dr. Esselstyn eats chocolate every Christmas, milk chocolate as a treat every Christmas and stuff. So this is actually a good thing for our argument that those people are non-vegans. Every cloud has a silver lining. You can say, look, these non-vegans are telling you to eat a plant-based diet with no animal products because it's the healthiest way to live. There's no agenda here. Because the most foolproof diet that anyone can do is just simply a whole foods plant-based diet. You don't need to do these weird sort of juicing diets or soup diets or anything like that. And you get a lot of people, when they fall onto these diets, they start obsessively calorie counting and stuff like that, and that's bad to do, especially with plant-based diets and stuff where the fat content is lower. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people sort of come up to you with these anecdotes. It particularly tends to be young girls actually who say stuff like, I tried going vegan, but I got really sick. Either that's a lie, or if it is true, it's because they were probably obsessively calorie counting and stuff, and they were just portion controlling and having these tiny little salads and stuff. Because if the pressures on people, social pressures on people, to maintain a certain body weight and stuff, because they get bullied at school or whatever it is. But the thing is with the whole food plant-based diet is eat as much as you want. You don't have to portion control. You don't have to calorie count or anything like that. You can eat as many complex carbs as you want. You don't have to. The carbophobia, as in when people say, I avoid carbs and stuff like that, that's to do with refined carbs. So when people are talking like that, it's to do with white rice, white pasta, sugar and things like that. And that's when the fear comes from. The optimum source of energy for the human body is carbohydrates. Humans are built to run on carbs. We should not be avoiding carbohydrates, complex carbs, whole grains and stuff, legumes. These should make fruits, vegetables. These should make the proportion of our the main proportion of our diet. But there's a new one coming out soon called Game Changers. Don't know if you've heard of that, and that looks really good. So that's got a lot of good vegan athletes in that. I think it's got Patrick Baboumian. Now he's a really good one to mention if anyone says vegans are weak and vegans don't get enough protein. Well, you can just ask them why the man who holds the world record for the most weight ever lifted is a vegan then. And this guy's also broke the keg lift world record, I think, several times. This guy carried like the weight of a horse on his shoulders and walked with it. And people are saying vegans don't get enough protein. It's just another one of the ridiculous myths that's being put out there. And a horse, by the way, is also a vegan. All the biggest, strongest, most powerful animals on the planet are vegans as well. So it's a very important point to add. And that's it, because a lot of people say to you, they go stuff like, tell that to a lion, tell a lion coming at you to not eat meat. And you can just say, tell a rhino coming at you to eat meat. So what's the difference though?